Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Ellen Remmer. I'm co-founder of Invest for Better, an organization that helps women activate the power of their investments for social good. And we are delighted to welcome both Invest for Better members and circle leaders and a few others to our first Activator Series talk of 2022. We could think of no better person to launch this series than Amy Domini, a pioneer, innovator, and influencer in the field of sustainable investing. Amy is the founder and chair of Domini Impact Investments, one of the earliest players in the social impact space. She has been widely recognized as the leading voice for socially responsible investing, including by Time Magazine, which named Amy to its Time 100 list of the world's most influential people. I am particularly pleased to have Amy here because she was an early influence on my life's work around wealth and society, first in philanthropy and now in investing. In the early 90s, very early 90s, I came across her first book, Ethical Investing, and was bowled over by her perspective and approach. I remember I got the chance to interview her for a conference I was coordinating on the ethics of wealth, and it was incredibly helpful. So Amy has recently released a new book, I think her third or fourth, this one called Thoughts on People, Planet, and Profit, that contains some of her writings over the past few decades. In it, she mentions that she played a role in every stage of mission-driven investing and nurtured it until impact investing was a field. I think those words, more than any other, give you a sense of who Amy is and what she stands for. So Amy's going to speak to us for about 30 minutes, and then Invest for Better co-founder Janine Firpo, so author of Activate Your Money, will interview her briefly before we open up the floor to your questions. Meanwhile, feel free to put those in the chat as they come up. And we'll pull from them when we get to the Q&A portion of our program. If there's a lot of questions in there, Janine will probably jump right to asking your questions. So with that, and as you know, we are recording. Our plan is to simply record while Amy is doing her initial presentation and then to turn off the recording during the Q&A so that we can share this more publicly. So with that, please join me in welcoming Amy.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying I woke up several times last night sneezing, so I'm going to be constantly reaching for Kleenex during this. So don't be distracted. I wish it weren't true too, but I may be coming down with something. I'd begin by thanking Ellen for your efforts through the years. We know that it was a difficult transition for many family foundations to make, to consider, to open themselves up to the concept that the way they made investment decisions would matter. And their fiduciaries were focused on making as many impactful grants as possible and wearing blinders to any argument that might distract them from that purpose. But today, with thanks to TPI largely, philanthropists recognize that the corpus of the portfolio can also play a role in expanding the missions, the work that they're attempting to accomplish. I'd also like to start by acknowledging many women who created and nurtured this field alongside of me, most particularly Joan Bavaria, founder of what is now Trillium, also less well known, but as the founder of Ceres, now very ably managed by Mindy Luber, another early voice in this and continuing voice in this, Alice Tepper Marlin, who created the first corporate grading system, while at Council on Economic Priorities, Julie Eads at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund for decades, teaching us what it meant to make loans to people who were considered unbankable before her efforts and those of other community development financial institutions came along. Alisa Gravitz at the Green America, popularizing the field, and the remarkable Hazel Henderson, who turned economics upside down with her writings. This is a field that really has been shaped and nurtured by a handful of women through the decades to be what it is today. I thought if you'd forgive me, I'd give you a sampling of one of the pieces that I wrote. It's very short. They're all very short. They're all, you could probably read 6 of them on a subway ride. But this one was written in 2009, and it's called Of Laughter and Landmines. Last year, I visited a clinic for landmine victims in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, run by an extraordinary organization called Veterans International Cambodia. There you find extreme examples of hope and despair crowded into a small space. The clinic creates individually tailored prostheses known for their flexibility and lifelike qualities. A blind and legless man, a victim himself, assembles customized wheelchairs for children and adults. Physical training helps victims transition into living with disabilities. While there, I met a young girl, perhaps 6 years old, who was learning to hold herself erect. She was strapped to a large board to train her spine to sense what erect feels like, a measure made necessary by years without treatment. To occupy her time and to keep her working, a volunteer stood 3 or 4 feet in front of her and threw a beach ball her way. As the two played catch, they chatted and giggled. Suddenly, the girl let out a peal of laughter so startling, everyone looked up and smiled. Here I was, seemingly a million miles away from anything I knew. A 6-year-old girl was laughing, while Cambodia is riddled with landmines. 40% of the villages have a landmine problem. An estimated 6 million landmines remain hidden in Cambodia's earth. In her position, I could not have laughed. Yet, landmines are made for profit. We have just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Ottawa Convention banning them. Most regrettably, the United States hasn't signed that treaty. But certain investors, like the Norwegian National Pension Fund, refuse to profit from companies that make them. It takes homework. Many investors unknowingly own shares in landmine manufacturers. Sadly, the child I saw was a typical victim. Landmine fields are often marked, but a child who can't read doesn't understand the danger, and she's heavy enough to trip the bomb. According to the UN, it could take 100 years to remove the Cambodia's landmines. As social investors, our emotional response to such an extreme imbalance between profit and harm compels us to take practical action. We invest to contribute to the common good, a green planet, a world of peace and justice, and when we imagine the future, joy and laughter are at its core. The courage and hope of the small girl I met in Cambodia were enough to allow her to laugh, but our world should never have allowed her injury to happen. In the West, many of us enjoy a world that is safe and clean. We enjoy good food, work at jobs that are interesting and beneficial to others. We see potential for continued prosperity. Universal human dignity would give that girl the same outlook. We must build our shared prosperity together and define profit, including those we derive from our investments, in terms of mutual benefit. Social investing provides one important way to reach that world, and that's no laughing matter. I always joke up at the last line of my own writing. Sorry, not very professional. Many of you know that I call myself an advocate for responsible investing, and I believe that one of the reasons I'm good at being an advocate is that I tell stories. People hear these stories and understand the message behind them more easily than if I plow into the hard, cold facts of the matter. The book is a collection of something similar to what I just read, and together they make a convincing story that the role of investments can make the world a better place. And today I'm facing a more sophisticated audience. You know the basis of my approach, and you have had successes. And these successes are important. Without them, we would revert to a profit at all costs approach. So here I take a few minutes to remind you of the 3 core elements to impact investing And I'll discuss some impacts that they've already had and will continue to have. Element 1, we set standards in what we will invest in. These standards apply to stocks, bonds, mutual funds, venture capital, private real estate, illiquid debt, and short any investment. The standards hold two primary goals: livable planet and a life worth living. I speak primarily using the vocabulary ecological sustainability and human dignity, universal human dignity. We engage with our investments. This is number 2. We write letters, we sign petitions, we vote our proxies, we even file proxies. These are regulated requests for change in management behavior. We file them with our companies that we're invested in. And number 3, we support the grassroots through our investments. This might be done by investing in social or impact bonds or a mutual fund with this focus, might be done in direct loans to nonprofits with important work of lending to the poor or the organic farmer who previously was unbanked. This might be venture capital investment in a company that gives employees a stake in outcome or community control over their own water source. We call these the 3 legs of the stool. A 3-legged stool cannot stand if a leg is missing. When people ask which asset manager is doing real impact work, I ask if that manager does these 3 things. I have built 2 asset management businesses. In addition to the Domini Impact Fund, which was mentioned earlier, the sustainability group at Loring, Wilkin, and Coolidge, where we manage individual portfolios. Both of these organizations do these 3 things. But did it help? Does it help? We can see immediately the furtherance of people in the planet from leg 3. A loan to start an organic farm in the Berkshires, along with technical assistance and support for several years, is a storyline we can easily follow. We can see immediately the furtherance of people on the planet from leg 2. When the sustainability group wanted to remove pesticides that kill bees from plants sold at Home Depot, we asked to meet with management. We met with management and we got the pesticide removed. Again, it's a storyline that's easy to follow. The 3rd leg takes more sophistication. We set standards. We achieve more than self-consistency. But do we make the world a better place? Well, we've gotten some laws. Some nations and stock exchanges now mandate greater disclosure and transparency. Starting this year, our regulators are mandating corporate boards reveal self-identified and anonymous statistics about diversity of board members. And new laws will mandate that there be at least one self-defined female and at least one underrepresented minority or member of LGBT community on the board. We have corporate social responsibility reports. They're global. There are over 7,000 of them published every year. You go to the investor page on any publicly traded company, and you will find their corporate social responsibility report. It did not exist. Even 10 years ago, that figure was more like 700 companies. It did not exist. There are now corporate sustainability officers at almost all Fortune 500 companies. I know. I filed, I didn't have to file. I raised the issue at MasterCard as to why they didn't have one, pointed out the statistics, and they went out and hired a sustainability officer who then went through their entire manufacturing, and they use a lot of server farms. They're a software company. They use a lot of energy at those server farms, rewrote their whole energy rules because they had somebody in place to do it. So we know we have had these kinds of changes so far. But for me, these are still strong anecdotal micro benefits. I'm looking for something structural, and the structural comes from financial services itself. This is a powerful industry. It's global. It doesn't belong to the United States. It doesn't belong to the city in London. It's a global entity. It supersedes governments. It is operating with limitless, virtually limitless resources. It is, it has at its fingertips near perfect information. When a Tesla on autopilot crashes, it takes about 40 seconds for hedge funds globally to respond. It is, I've tried so many times to get accurate numbers on this, but what I can count, what is publicly disclosed, the amount of money that changes hands in financial markets daily is between 11 and 20 times more money than changes hands in supermarkets and other transactions on the planet. We're talking about Main Street versus Wall Street, and Wall Street's, at least I'm very comfortable saying, 11 times stronger, and I think it could be a great deal higher. This industry is accountable to no nation, has no superseding governance structure, and if allowed to care only about profits, fiduciaries will find ways to seek out appropriate populations for the supply of body parts to those who can afford them. There is no decency here. There's only one way to control global finance, in my opinion, and that is to infiltrate it and pervert it to do good. And that's what we have done. And here's why it works. And let's learn from history. The 1929 crash was in some ways brought about by the fact that there were no rules. And CEOs would come out and say, we had a great year. And they'd have some definition of great year and then talk about it. And as a result of the crash of 1929, regulators were invented to look at what the rules should be. And they were made to report, these corporations were made to report on financial transactions, margin profits, earnings, number of employees, who the top executives and the board members were. And over the last 90 years, those things have become the purpose of corporations. They have become the only thing that corporate management focused on. By contrast, Europe, for many decades, mandated that the public good also be reported. Japan, for many decades, mandated that the cost or benefit to the Japanese society of your environmental behavior be reported. I went to Japan to meet with Fuji, I'm going to say 15, 20 years ago. That year, their reporting on their benefit, and it was a benefit in their case, to Japanese people took 17 pages of their annual report. It was not light reporting. This has caught my eye and made me wonder, what if mandated reporting on supporting steps toward ecological sustainability and universal human dignity could be harnessed and used on within the greatest network, financial services on earth, and used to do good? And then I wondered, was there any way to do it without harnessing finance? And no, I really don't think there is. I think it's too strong. I think the power of financial markets with no rules other than making money would destroy people on the planet. And certainly one industry, the oil industry, has set out to do it. So this is why setting standards are so important. Without refusing to buy certain investments, we lose the ability to engage finance in the struggle. This is why I welcome so many new products and managers entering the field, calling it ESG or impact or social or responsible or triple P, as I do in the name of the book. I don't worry about who's best at it yet. I like having the broad support of a great number of actors, and I have great faith that each of them will become more sophisticated and more committed to the goals that we share as the first wave of social investors. But it all begins and ends with being able to take a complex situation and turn it into a story. In my book, I speak of a time my mother and I went to Walmart, and she grumbled, "I don't see why they have to make parking lots so horrible. A few trees and benches wouldn't kill them." True, but it would cost money. However, if it also generated kind of a credit that investors respected, they wouldn't worry about the money it cost them for those benches and those trees. We are the investors creating the system to generate the credits, and that is why we are essential to the struggle for a livable planet and lives worth living. I have a few more minutes in my time lot, so I thought if I did, I would close with one more short story, which is written in 2016 and called The Cycle of Life. When I was quite young, our house backed up to a town cemetery. All of us kids thought it was a really good place to play. It was a spot for capture the flag and all sorts of running games, and we really liked to play hide and seek there, especially at sunset. We met at Kerry. Kerry was a big family headstone in the back corner. It was one of the first words I learned to spell. On one side of the monument was a meadow, the unused portion of the graveyard. Long grass sloped down to the woods. On the other side were a great many gravestones, perfect to hide behind. Looking back, I find this to be a pleasant thought, the image of children full of life frolicking in a place set aside for remembrance of the deceased has an uplifting spirit. It never occurred to me to find the place spooky. It was fun. I will admit I once took flowers off a grave and brought them to my mother, who promptly told me not to take flowers from graves. I had a great shock and couldn't figure out how on earth she was able to figure that out, and was quite in awe of her. Suddenly, really in the blink of an eye, I've grown up, but also grown old. I write this the day before my birthday. It will be my 66th. Which somewhat startles me. I may not be ancient, but I'm old enough to have 4 granddaughters and old enough to be thinking of the cycle of life. Birth and death, new life, joy, peace, and fear all meld into a seamless stream of consciousness as one ages. Customs change. It isn't so common for children to play in cemeteries these days. It isn't a matter of right or wrong. It's just different. I feel fear for the future of my granddaughters, but I'm nonetheless more at peace with the issue than I was 2 decades ago. It isn't that humankind is safer. It is more a letting go of anger at things I cannot change and finding gentleness about whatever decline for me lies ahead. My career, that of advocating for using finance as a means of providing universal human dignity and ecological sustainability, was built on anger, my fury at the system for its destruction of beauty and peace, just to make a buck. It fueled the construction of many businesses, and I like to think was the basis upon which a field of responsible investing was built. Now it's time for others to feed the anger, to channel it into a force for good. For me, it's time to reflect and remember, to assist and admire, to enjoy and enable. This is something of a surprise. Had you asked me even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known that I'd actually enjoy aging. One of the best parts is that you get to see how things turn out. Professionally, some major impacts have resulted from the work that I had so much to do with. I see more than 5,000 companies have annual reports on their corporate social responsibility. That never would have happened if responsible investors had not been pushing for information like this for 30 years. This is huge. With our efforts, company management teams would never be spending time calculating costs or benefits to people on the planet. I read that tens of millions of children who used to work in sweatshops no longer do, thanks to new, more enlightened corporate attitude when choosing who to do business with. Those children have directly benefited from responsible investors' insistence on tracking how T-shirts and other products got delivered so cheaply to our stores. There is much to look back upon and say, in a way, I helped make that happen. In the New York Times, I read a story about the failure of companies to adequately assess and inform shareholders about their risks on climate change. The article blamed the Securities Exchange Commission for inadequately supervising risk disclosure. There was no mention of me or my field, but I know that I have written the SEC, senators, and policymakers many times on this issue. And I know that my peers have kept the pressure on, and now it's going mainstream. Innocence lost, peace gained, and years passing lead to new views. I know responsible investing makes a really important difference in the world, and that the world is better off for it. I have seen the shift. There, I'll leave you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the time.
Hi, thank you. I'm Janine Firpo, as Ellen said earlier, the co-founder of Invest for Better. And Amy, thank you so much for spending your time with us. You really have been so profoundly important in this movement. And I love the fact that you started your comments with recognizing so many of the other women that joined you along the way. And I just think that that is a tribute to who you are and to them too. And I think it's so important, the role that women have played. And we'll talk about that a little more. But before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to close out this segment of our conversation with some additional words from your book that I thought were really fantastic. And you said, I can look back on the work of the firm I helped create and truly say that we have made a difference. But it all begins with seeing simple truths. It begins with the collective realization that the secret to making an impact is small. Together, we each can do something. And that, in the end,